Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the mythic journey of the mind to understand why true self-transformation feels so agonizingly uncomfortable. Now, if you've ever tried to drastically change your life and suddenly hit this massive wall of exhaustion, resistance, or just paralyzing fear, let me tell you, you are definitely not alone. So let's unpack this fascinating psychological process and figure out what's literally happening beneath the surface when we attempt to change who we are.
You know that feeling when you look in the mirror one day and realize the person staring back feels like a complete stranger? It's jarring, right? Maybe even a little scary. But that experience is actually the very first stage of genuine transformation. It's a massive, flashing sign signaling the painful, but absolutely necessary departure from your old life. You haven't quite arrived at your new self yet, but you fundamentally know, like deep in your bones, that you can no longer be the old you. So we've got to address this heavy question head-on. Why does real psychological growth feel less like a triumphant victory lap and more like a profound loss? We're so conditioned by mainstream society to think that personal growth is supposed to feel empowering, motivating, and super exciting every single step of the way. But the reality of the human psyche? Well, true change requires actively grieving the self you're leaving behind.
Everywhere you look, culture is feeding us cheap life hacks and surface-level motivation. You know the drill. It relies on external goals, these sudden hyped-up bursts of energy, which almost always lead to a rapid relapse right back into old behaviors. But true transformation, lasting inner change, that requires a grueling, complete shift in your underlying psychological identity. It's a sustainable evolution, not just a temporary motivation high.
Think of it like an internal hero's journey that maps right across your own development. Back in childhood, your authentic self basically learned to disappear just to meet the expectations of your parents, teachers, and society. And that adaptation naturally leads to forming this thick, protective psychological mask that you call adulthood. But eventually, you hit a breaking point. That old, constructed self just can't sustain the weight anymore, and it finally begins to die. That brings us to part one, the mask of adulthood, living behind a constructed identity.
And part two, the brain's resistance, how we learn to become someone else.
Here's something absolutely crucial to understand. That adult mask we just talked about, it was once a highly effective psychological shield for your survival. But when you finally realize it's suffocating you and you try to take it off, your brain actively fights back. It treats this identity shift as a literal threat to your physical survival. This intense resistance all comes down to subconscious conditioning. These are deeply ingrained beliefs and emotional patterns running entirely on autopilot. Your subconscious acts like this strict, relentless gatekeeper. It actively blocks your conscious attempts at evolution because, simply put, it rigidly values safety over freedom. If your current unhappy identity kept you alive yesterday, your subconscious aggressively wants to keep you exactly the same today.
To protect that old you, the mind deploys a heavy arsenal of defense mechanisms. You might suddenly feel paralyzed by a fear of the unknown, or get these intense, almost physical cravings for your old, familiar life. Your mind will even use automatic emotional conditioning, like intentionally triggering anxiety the second you try something new. Or it uses complex self-deception, literally convincing you that, hey, you don't really need to change right now. All of these tactics serve one single function, tricking you right back into relapsing into your old, comfortable habits.
Which leads us into part three, the night the old self dies, reaching the breaking point.
Now, if you consistently push through all those internal defenses, you are forced completely into the unknown. You hit a definitive psychological breaking point where that constructed identity permanently crumbles. And let me validate this for you. The profound pain, grief, and disorientation you feel right here is incredibly real. You are mourning a past version of yourself. But compounding this internal pain is a huge external challenge. Why does the world resist your evolution? As your internal identity crumbles, you face an unsettling reality. Your peers, your friends, your environment, they will often actively resist your transformation. Why? Because your change forces them to confront their own stagnation. Your shifting identity disrupts the predictable dynamic they rely on to feel safe.
Moving to part four, the quiet loneliness, entering the void.
This intense combination of internal ego death and external social friction forces you into a brand new phase, the quiet loneliness of becoming. You've disconnected from your old reality, old habits, maybe even old relationships, but you haven't yet established your new ones. It's like you're suspended in midair between trapeze bars. In this stark isolation, you are forced to sit alone with yourself in the void. No distractions, no external validation to prop you up. But scientifically speaking, this quiet downtime is absolutely required for neuroplasticity to occur. The void is precisely where the deepest, most critical psychological rewiring happens. You literally cannot bypass this step. This quiet loneliness is the necessary incubator for your future self.
Next up is Part 5, Rebuilding from the Inside Out, Constructing Your True Identity.
Only once the old self has been thoroughly burned away by that quiet loneliness can you finally begin the organic process of rebuilding. And lasting change follows a very specific psychological sequence. Step 1 is a deep identity shift. You fundamentally declare who you are now at your core. This naturally prompts Step 2, subconscious rewiring, where your brain actually begins to accept this new internal reality. That allows Step 3, a completely new self-image to form in your mind's eye. And only then, at Step 4, will your daily behaviors and habits naturally fall into place, without requiring intense willpower. Most people try to skip straight to Step 4, and that is exactly why they fail.
Listen, if you take away just one single thing from this explainer today, let it be this golden rule. Your internal identity must completely shift before your external habits will ever permanently change. You simply cannot trick a nervous system that still identifies as the old you into consistently performing the habits of the new you. It just doesn't work. The inner shift must dictate the outer reality. Which brings us to our final part, Part 6, The Fire Inside, Returning to Your Authentic Self. Emerging from the ashes of that ego death and surviving the quiet loneliness, you finally reconnect with the raw, authentic energy you likely buried decades ago. You'll ultimately realize that the grand goal of this entire exhausting journey wasn't to somehow hack yourself into becoming a shiny, brand new person. Not at all. The true goal was simply to strip away everything that wasn't authentically you, finally uncovering the powerful fire that was already burning inside you all along.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the mind today, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Ask yourself, are you finally ready to brave the loneliness and let the old self die? True transformation is never easy, for sure, but on the other side of that void is the authentic life you were always meant to live.